Hello, and welcome to another edition of Peninsula 24.
On the U.S. presidential election, which took place on November 8th, Republican Party candidate Donald Trump became the 45th president of the United States. Along with the continuing nuclear threats from the North, there has been widespread criticism over the Obama administration's policy towards North Korea. All eyes are now on the new administration's policies towards the North. What kind of changes will Trump's victory and his America First foreign policy approach bring to the U.S. policy towards the Korean Peninsula? On today's episode, we discuss the expected changes in the U.S. policy on North Korea under the Trump administration and outlook for Korea-U.S. relations.
For today's discussion, we are joined by Professor Park Tae-woo from Korea-U.
Thank you for inviting me here today.
And Professor Jeong-hun from Korea National Diplomatic Academy.
Thank you for having me here today.
And Dr. Woo Jung-yeop from Asan Institute for Policy Studies.
Thank you.
Professor Park, Donald Trump has been elected the 45th president of the U.S. And a lot of issues surrounding the Korean Peninsula have risen during the presidential election period.
Right.
What has been the major direction of Trump's policy toward North Korea?
Before he was elected as the president of the United States, rather he talked, some informal security, options as a businessman-oriented, mentality, something like that. But after he was elected, probably he must be consulted with a lot of security experts regarding Korean questions. So I'm sure that he will talk more stable options in the future. And probably because during the last 8 years of Obama administration, the major North Korean policy direction was based on strategic patience, something like that, which means that if North Korea is not fully committed to denuclearization, Obama administration was not interested in talks with North Korean regime, something like that. But probably Trump administration will be moving to a more willingness to have a dialogue with Kim Jong-un regime. Otherwise, deadlock situation on the North Korean nuclear question will have a lot of problems, with all the issues surrounding the Northeast Asian security frameworks. So I think, nuclear freezing or nuclear denuclearization, out of these two options, first, Trump administration will pursue a policy of selective engagement with North Korean regime to talk more and check again whether Kim Jong-un regime will be really seriously considering full commitment to further denuclearization, or they will just spend the time deceiving people like in the past almost 20 years making more nuclear weapons. So I think checking and sometimes talking with those people concerned in North Korea will be temporarily processed after he was being elected. He was elected and probably after being inaugurated in next year, January, I think.
During the election period, Trump has mentioned that the continuing North Korean nuclear threat show the failure of the Obama administration policy toward the North Korea. And does it mean that Trump will take a totally different stance on North Korean issues?
As Professor Park just mentioned, that we don't know yet whether Trump policy toward North Korea will be changed or not. But certainly, Republican side has been criticizing Obama's policy toward North Korea because they argue that it has been too soft. Because Obama's policy toward North Korea has been dependent on China's cooperation. So they basically outsourced U.S. North Korean policy to China. So unless China cooperates with the United States to put enough pressure on North Korea, Obama's policy of strategic patience could not yield any meaningful result. That is why it's not only Trump, but also all the Republican side of foreign policy experts has been arguing that Obama's policy has failed to produce any meaningful result. But as Professor Park mentioned, that Trump's policy toward North Korea or Asia has not been clear. But one thing that he mentioned during his policy conference in May in Washington, D.C. was that Trump government will not do overstretch. That means that unless it's vital to U.S. interest, United States will not be involved in the world affairs as before. So that's one signal of Trump's policy, that possible Trump policy, if Trump is going to run the government next year.
Let's talk more about North Korean policy promoted by the Obama administration. President Obama has promoted the policy of strategic patience against the North. And then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton played a leading role in boosting the policy. Please elaborate more on the strategic patience. What does it mean, and what's the major content of the policy?
Okay. First, let me briefly talk about the Obama administration's policy toward North Korea, because the patience policy is part of the big scheme of the Obama policy on North Korea. The core of Obama administration's policy on North Korea is its security concerns, focusing on North Korea's nuclear threat. As a way of resolving North Korea's nuclear threat, Obama administration established the principle of the complete and verifiable elimination of nuclear programs and considered both direct dialogue with North Korea and strategic patience policy. But the Obama administration's effort to engage more closely with North Korea were shattered by North Korea's missile and the nuclear tests. So Obama administration has promoted the policy of strategic patience against North Korea, and as you mentioned, the Secretary Hillary Clinton played a leading role in boosting the policy. So the patient policy means that U.S. would not have a direct dialogue with North Korea unless North Korea does not show a reliable, sincere attitude to eliminate its nuclear programs. So U.S. confirmed that the basis of the U.S. security policy on Korean Peninsula was the denuclearization of North Korea, and if North Korea gives up nuclear programs, it will get political stability and economic prosperity. Otherwise, U.S. employ various ways to pay back the North Korea's unacceptable choice.
Adding one more thing, that Donald Trump mentioned during his campaign period that probably China should be more engaged with North Korean nuclear games. Plus, he suggests the idea that also Iran, which has a trade volume with North Korea, those two countries must be more involved in the North Korean nuclear elimination process in the future. Something like that. As we mentioned already, James Clapper, director of U.S. intelligence agents, he already told us that there is little possibility of North Korean denuclearization in the future. So it means that probably Donald Trump will be using a strong leverage of a Chinese factor to put more and more pressure to North Korean regime in the future. Otherwise, talks and probably we will also waste another some years. This is very serious problem, I think.
If I may, that we have to be careful in interpreting what Mr. Clapper said during the recent press conference. The reason why Mr. Clapper mentioned that there is no hope for the denuclearization is that actually it was asked by the question session at the seminar, and Leon Siegel, who recently met North Korean officials in Malaysia, and who always has been supporting the dialogue with North Korea, and he asked whether the U.S. intelligence community has been asked to assess the possibility of exchange negotiation for the denuclearization purpose. So Mr. Clapper answered that there is no possibility of denuclearization through negotiation, because it has been agreed by almost all experts that North Korea has not been developing the nuclear weapons for the bargaining purpose. North Korea is going to keep the nuclear weapons because they know that it's vital for their security and the regime's sustainability. So we have to be very careful to interpret what U.S. officials or U.S. experts said about the negotiation and the intent of denuclearization by the U.S. government.
Dr. Woo, along with the continuing nuclear tests and missile launches from North Korea, the policy of strategic patience has been viewed with skepticism within the U.S. political field. How do you assess the policy of strategic patience against the North, and which has been promoted by the Obama administration?
Probably we can say that the Obama's policy of the strategic patience has been failed in a sense that it has not produced the result that we wanted. But if we ask if there is any alternative than current policy, then we have to be very careful in saying that, because it's not the policy itself, but how we implement the policy is very important. And we just discussed the China's role of denuclearizing North Korea. Everyone knows that it is very critical that China needs to put much more pressure to North Korea if we really want to achieve denuclearization. But U.S. Obama administration's approach towards China was that if U.S. pushed China too much, then China would back off. That means that U.S. has to be very careful in terms of getting help, getting cooperation from China when it comes to North Korea policy. So they are taking very gradual steps to getting cooperation from China. That's the approach from the Obama administration. And actually that was criticized by the Republican Senate Foreign Affairs Committee, that they argue that we cannot rely anymore on China for North Korean policy, and China has not been doing anything on North Korea because China's strategic interest is in keeping North Korea as is. So China prefers the status quo. So for the strategic reason, China doesn't have any reason to follow up and cooperate with the United States. So that's why Republican side always criticize Obama administration that U.S. relied on China too much on North Korea, and that's how we view or expect Trump is going to review the current policy for his next administration.
So, if strategic patience has failed completely, then probably dialogue and sanctions, something like that. And probably if Donald Trump, as he mentioned during the campaign process, if he allows us, South Korea and Japan, to have nuclear weapons, then not actually, this couldn't happen as of now, but as a diplomatic rhetoric, pressuring Chinese Communist Party more to have a strong leverage against North Korean regime, then this will work probably. But all the same processes repeated in the past during the Obama administration, Clinton administration, this has not produced anything. Only 12 nuclear weapons as of now, estimated to have by North Korean regime as of now. Then I think Donald Trump probably he is a president without political background, so he will try a radical approach, probably talking more big. Well, then if Chinese Communist Party does not cooperate in the future with us, then we will let Japan and South Korea to develop nuclear weapons. Then we don't talk about anymore on the issue of a balance of terror on the Korean Peninsula or something like that. Then this will give a huge pressure on the Chinese Communist regime in the future, I think.
Then, Professor Park, North Korea has shown its strong will to never give up its nuclear weapons. How do you see the possibility of the new U.S. government to enter into direct talk with North to negotiate a freeze of its nuclear weapons instead of denuclearization.
That's right. As of today, through 노동신문 daily newspaper, official mouthpiece of North Korean Workers' Party, they repeated that they will never give up nuclear weapons. Even Donald Trump, tries anything in the future like that. It means that the same patterns of nuclear negotiations could happen in the future. So, as of now, I'm thinking of two options: whether new administration in the future will talk about nuclear freezing, not denuclearization. Nuclear freezing, it means that, well, you don't develop more nuclear weapons and you don't probably sell any nuclear materials relevant to facility to terrorist groups or outside countries, something like that. Then Trump administration could again come into dialogue table, talk something, probably excluding our government, South Korea, for the purpose of making North Korea, freezing all those programs. Then North Korea will probably try to talk, quite possibly raising the issue of replacing armistice agreement with peace agreement between Washington and Pyongyang. Then this is a very, very miserable happening to us, to South Korean people. Then our diplomatic circle and our Ministry of Foreign Affairs must pay keen attention to this kind of process to happen in the future. So I think, little possibility of direct consulting as of now, but if Donald Trump, decide to the option of nuclear freezing in North Korea, then if North Korean regime comes to dialogue table, okay, we will freeze and we will ask you to another options like peace agreement between Washington and Pyongyang, then this could happen in the future. But this could be quite a fatal blow to South Korean security situation. So we must make effort diplomatically that not to happen, I think. And military option, it could be one of them, but not quite easy. But if North Korea continues to deceiving international community like they did in the past, probably Donald Trump could decide that, well, then we could go to a surgical strike, persuading Chinese Communist Party not to expand war on the Korean Peninsula, something like that. So we must be very careful in the future, I think.
You mentioned that the North Korea and the U.S. They're going through the repeated patterns in terms of the nuclear problem, and but it is said that nowadays the strongest sanctions against North Korea is on the way, like the UN resolution 2270. So what's your opinion about that? So do you think that the UN resolution 2270 would eventually be failed because of the lack of the Chinese cooperation?
That's right. After the fourth nuclear test, United Nations Security Council passed resolution 2270. But I don't think China is fully cooperating in implementing those resolutions, making North Korean regime to denuclearization. This is the problem, I think. Even after the fifth nuclear test, United Nations Security Council has not produced any resolutions after even 60 days, 61 days. It means that China and Russia is not cooperating with the international effort, United Nations effort to put more pressure on Pyongyang. But United States is unilaterally making more harsher pressures, like financial transactions, limitations, something like that. Also, particularly sanctioning particular companies, Chinese companies, to sell nuclear relevant materials to North Korean regime, something like that. But as of now, I don't have any evidence that China will be fully cooperating to the level the international community expect to denuclearize North Korean nuclear weapons. This is the problem, I think.
All right. Dr. Woo, along with the rising need to change the existing policy toward Pyongyang, different sizes of opinions has risen in the U.S., including the need to carry out a preemptive strike on the North and have a negotiation with Pyongyang. What would be the most effective measure for the next U.S. government to better deal with the North Korea?
Actually, the possibility of preemptive attack is not for negotiation. Military community has been discussing the possibility of preemptive attack because you never cannot rule out any possibility in the war if it really happens. So it's not for for negotiation purpose when we discussed about the possibility of preemptive attacks. And we have to talk what we want to get from the negotiation with North Korea if we really want to have a dialogue with North Korea. What can we offer? We have to think that in advance. Let's say that North Korea says that they are going to declare that they are going to freeze the current nuclear program. Then what can we offer? If North Korea is sincere enough to say that the freezing the current program is the beginning of the negotiation toward denuclearization, then we might be discussing the possibility of exchanging something for the denuclearization, the end state. But if North Korea says that, we are not going to move beyond the freezing, then there is no way that we can offer anything in exchange for it. Because North Korea is never going to give up the nuclear weapon, and that means North Korea is going to be awarded a nuclear weapon state. That means the collapse of the non-proliferation treaty, which is technically North Korea is still a member of NPT because NPT does not accept its withdrawal yet, technically. So if North Korea is awarded with a nuclear weapon state, that means the one pillar of U.S. security construction is collapsed. So if we are ever going to discuss the possibility of dialogue, we have to think about what's the end state of the negotiation and what we can offer. In that way, even though we have to prepare for the possibility of any discussion between U.S. and North Korea directly, excluding South Korea, but I think the possibility of that kind of dialogue will be very unlikely because U.S. is not getting anything from North Korea for that kind of negotiation for U.S. national interest.
Now I'd like to touch upon the outlook for the policy on the Korean Peninsula, which will be carried out by the Trump administration, which that will officially take office in January next year. Unlike Clinton, who has not shown any differences in comparison to existing North Korean policy of the U.S., the many experts have said that the direction of Trump's policy on the North is not clear yet. What is the outlook for the Trump's policy toward North Korea after taking office?
I also agree with the experts' opinion that Trump has not showed the direction of his policy on North Korea. But due to the North Korea's nuclear tests and the recurring missile the launches this year, the North Korea emerged as a major issue during the U.S. presidential election this year. During the campaign season, Trump showed that he would not tolerate the North Korea's nuclear and missile threats. However, it's not still clear whether Trump has got a roadmap to resolve North Korea's nuclear threat. And Trump mentioned that China is pivotal to resolving North Korea's nuclear problem, but he hasn't showed how he would put pressure on China that has taken care of North Korea after its fifth nuclear test. So without any roadmap for dealing with North Korea, so I expect at this point that Trump administration would continue to pursue economic sanctions against North Korea during the first 6 months of the administration. But I'm not sure about how strong and effective the sanctions the Trump administration could carry out as Dr. The Park mentioned, because the Trump administration is expected to put more importance to carrying out the domestic issues and policies during its early term.
Right. Xi Jinping, Chinese leader, has consolidated his power base more, gaining, concentrating party powers at the hands of his right hands. It means that he was expecting probably more confrontations from the next U.S. administration than Donald Trump, with an attitude unexpected in the past. Then probably they will produce more conflict in the areas of protectionism. Also, on the issues of South China Sea issues, there will be more I think, tension ridden between the two countries in the future. But particularly regarding North Korean question, I think there is a little possibility that they should have a very deep dialogue, between the two superpowers in the year of G2, something like that. It is true that North Korea is such a small brother of the Chinese Communist Party, serving the security interest of China, probably, checking the rise of U.S. security interest in Northeast Asia. But China is also strongly opposed to further nuclear weapons of North Korea. And United States is strongly opposed it. Then it means that they could talk that, well, then we could eliminate Kim Jong-un, North Korean leader, then probably Washington can allow Chinese Communist Party to select your own leader, but based on more moderate open door lines, based on collective leaderships without nuclear weapons. Then it means that the U.S. security interest and the Chinese interest will be melting down on the agreement. Then probably that could happen during Trump administration, because everything is possible in security talks between the two superpowers, excluding South Korean positions in the future. We must be very careful, I think. But if such a dictator, Kim Jong-un, is eliminated from the power and then a moderate reformative leadership is emerging out of the big deal there, then what is our position? Then, no nuclear weapons on the North Korea, and we could have more practical dialogue, then much better probably. Not bad, I think.
Okay.
But I wanted to add one thing about the possibility of having the direct dialogue between North Korea and the United States. During this U.S. campaign season, Trump mentioned that he was willing to meet Kim Jong-un with having hamburgers. So some people expect that the Trump, if elected, could have a direct dialogue with North Korea to resolve the North Korea problem. But I'm not sure about such possibility, because what Trump mentioned in the presidential election or campaign season was just a campaign talk. The main purpose of the campaign talk was to criticize the Clinton, the North Korea policy. And the Trump criticized the Clinton that she was just following what the Obama administration is doing to deal with North Korea. So just a campaign talk. So,
if I may add to what just Dr. Min said, is that the only reason that we expect or we argue that Trump government might initiate the dialogue with North Korea is what just Dr. Min just said, that Trump mentioned during his campaign that probably he could have hamburger with Kim Jong-un and talk. And the context of why he said that was that he want to show off his skills of negotiation with the partner. He already mentioned that he's going to have Mexican government to pay for the war. Then Mexican government even don't want to talk about it. So the way that Trump mentioned about the possibility of dialogue is almost negligible in case of foreign policy talking. So I think we should not put too much weight on the possibility of dialogue, even if Trump mentioned during the campaign trail that he could have dialogue with Kim Jong-un. So we have to be very careful what someone said during the campaign trail.
Dr. Woo, Trump has emphasized the role of China when it comes to tackling North Korean nuclear issues. He has said that China should change the current stance in order to put stronger pressure on the North. What's the reason for stressing the significance of China's role in dealing with the North Korean issues?
It's not only Trump, but also all the previous U.S. government has been arguing that China's role on imposing enough sanctions on North Korea is critical to achieve the denuclearization of North Korea. The reason why we believe that China's role is important is not the influence that China has on the North Korean government. So we don't expect like China one day say, oh, North Korea, you have to denuclearize. We don't expect that kind of dialogue between China and North Korea. It is only because the North Korea's economy is dependent upon China's economy. Iran's economy is very much different from North Korea's economy in its nature. So it is very, the Iran sanction was successful because Iran's economy was much more interconnected with the world through the finance and the energy sectors. So when U.S. put sanctions on Iran in energy and finance, Iran has to come to the table for the negotiation. For North Korea, even if we block any other channels of money flow to North Korea, if the channel with China, business channel with China is surviving, then the possibility of putting North Korea to the edge is very unlikely. So because all the business network is concentrated on China, and as we know that UN Sanction 20-70 allows livelihood need transactions. So even if UN Resolution 20-70 prohibits of transaction of coals or the natural resources, they can allow it for the livelihood need. And the member country here, China, can determine whether it's livelihood need or not. So unless Chinese government said that this transaction is not for livelihood need, there is no way that we can block the transaction between the Chinese firms and North Korea. So that is why we believe that China's role as a UN member country is very critical in terms of putting enough pressure for North Korea feels that we might have two options, whether we are going to collapse because of the sanctions or we are going to have to denuclearize. So unless North Korean government feels that we are going to collapse anyway, then North Korean government doesn't have any reason to come for the table for the negotiation.
Right. Then, Dr. Woo, considering the passive attitude of China in implementing the North Korea sanctions, what kind of measures will be promoted by the next U.S. government to make China take a stronger stance on the North?
The best way, I believe, for the U.S. To pursue to denuclearize North Korea is financial sector sanctions. Because last month, U.S. House proposed a bill that they are going to sanction SWIFT unless it cuts the deal with the North Korean banks. But we don't know yet how much money was transacted through the SWIFT because North Korea has been already blocked by the international community. So dollar transaction is very much limited. So we assume that the amount of dollar through the SWIFT is very limited. Maybe Chinese government work as a broker between the Western bank and North Korean bank. So the Western bank can send the money, send the dollar to the Chinese bank, and Chinese bank can send the yuan to North Korea. So North Korea and China can deal in the yuan basis. So unless we put the pressure on Chinese bank and the financial sector, which has a transaction with North Korea, it's unlikely that North Korea's economy is hit hard by these sanctions. So we need to ask U.S. to much more seriously consider the possibility of put secondary boycott kind of sanctions that can also put pressure on Chinese government. So unless Chinese government cooperate, Chinese firms will be sanctioned by the U.S. law. So that is why I believe that the U.S. government that's how U.S. government can negotiate with China in terms of how much pressure that U.S. can put on China's side.
But
Right.
I have a question, Dr. Woo. But some people say that inside the North Korea, the kind of the capitalist the market system, which is called the Jangmadang, the size of the market is growing. So the world community is putting the stronger sanctions on North Korea. So the running the Jangmadang and the hardship of the common people in North Korea. So the economic situation is getting worse. So some people argue that there is a possibility that there would be a serious complaints and revolts the coming from the North Korean the grassroots, preventing or the cracking down that kind of possibility. North Korean government, Kim Jong-un government, may have some kind of a change in terms of pursuing the nuclear the weapon development. So and then the coming on to the negotiation table. So what do you think about that?
So someone who criticized the effectiveness of sanction argue that sanction only give hardships to the ordinary people in North Korea, not on the North Korean government. But North Korean people outside of Pyongyang has been leading by themselves. There is no meaningful public distribution system currently. So as you just mentioned that the market and all other economic activities are on their own. So even if we put sanctions, much stronger sanctions on North Korea, ordinary people's life would not be much affected by the sanctions. It's the elites and the elites who live in Pyongyang, they are the biggest target of sanctions and they will be hit hard by the sanctions. And that's the most important element that we believe that can be dangerous to the survivability of the North Korean regime. That's why we believe, or I believe, that much harder sanction will be effective in the future to change the behavior of the North Korean regime.
Let's now discuss the outlook for Korea-U.S. relations after the establishment of the Trump administration. Korea has maintained a strategic alliance with Washington, so it can be strongly influenced by the U.S. policy toward North Korea. Trump has outlined American first foreign policy along with the view of isolationism. Please elaborate more the foreign policy philosophy of the Donald Trump.
The Trump's America First kind of the isolationist foreign policy means that U.S. will minimize its military intervention by reorganizing its current alliance system with the South Korea, Japan, and the West. Instead, U.S. would focus more on domestic issues to safeguard U.S. national interests. Under the situations that U.S. hegemony is declining after the 2008 financial crisis, and China is rising as a strong competitor, U.S. does not have enough resources to play as a world police. So U.S. needs to focus on domestic issues to recover its power. So Trump's accusations that U.S. allies' free ride on defense could be understood in the same vein. So he mentioned if South Korea and Japan does not pay more for the U.S. military support, then U.S. forces in South Korea and Japan could be pulled back. And U.S. may allow South Korea and Japan to have nuclear weapons for self-defense just in order to reduce U.S. security burdens. So Trump's neo-isolationist foreign policy that deviates from the traditional policy of the Republican Party, so it made the Republican leadership very embarrassed. Okay.
But isolationist policies, but still the Obama's policy pivot to Asia framework will not be changing in such a radical ways, probably incrementally, something like that. And Donald Trump wording that if our government does not share the U.S. troops positioning coast here, they will withdraw troops back to their homeland, something like that. I think that was just political campaign word, and that will not happen because they are having more security interest by having U.S. troops on the Korean Peninsula, checking the rise of China, also closely coordinating the options with Japanese security policies. So I think this is not to happen. The question is that then how Trump administration in the future will ask our government, to share more cost, in the future. Also, even on the issue of THAAD, probably Trump could ask us that, well, you can purchase, THAAD equipment, not just, providing land, for installing those equipment, something like that. So I think, his, isolationist trends that he mentioned during the election process could not be fully implemented, but partially adopted by different options. But still, in the area of security issues, I don't think he will be walking away from the Obama administration's strong commitment to pivot to Asia policies.
Foreign policies of the former U.S. president have been based on cooperation with this alliance in the field of security. In order to exert stronger influence on the global society, however, concerns have been raised over the possibility crisis of ROC and U.S. alliance system under the Trump administration. What is your take on this?
Actually, it is not us, but the European countries that has more concerns about Trump's ideas of the U.S. alliance structure. It's not only Trump, but also President Obama also criticized this year that NATO countries are free riders. In that speech, Obama administration did not touch Korea or Japan because they see the rising of China is the issues that U.S. alone cannot deal with. U.S. still needs the alliance with Korea and the alliance with Japan because Korea and Japan alone cannot counter the rise of China in the region. So if Trump government has any questions about its dependence on the alliance structure, it's not ROK-U.S. alliance or Japan-U.S. alliance, but the question is more for the U.S. alliance with NATO and the European countries. So even though he mentioned something like withdrawal of troops, but the possibility of destabilizing the ROK-U.S. alliance is very unlikely.
Korea-U.S. alliance have been serving the best interests of U.S. security strategies in this region, so it is not to happen. Rather, probably, as I told you before, they will be asking us to increase our defense burdens, talking on special measurement agreement, something like that, and also there is a little possibility that probably the wartime operational control right, had better be coming back to South Korean hands, something like that, because that means that our defense budget must be increased tremendously, which was covered by the U.S. forces, operational control concept, something like that. So I think U.S.-Korea alliance is to exist, to the degree that probably China could manage their military tactics in this region with more transparent and predictable ways in the future. Until that time, and until North Korean question is to be fully eliminated, then Korea-U.S. alliance has full values to the Washington side. So I think that probably, as I told you, the OPCON, wartime operational control issue could be emerge, when we have talked with Washington in the future. We have to prepare on the issue.
Professor Park, some people are saying the possibility of the Trump administration to try to complete the postponed transfer of wartime operation control of Korean forces. And there's been a growing need to re-examine the country's national defense policy. What is your take on this?
Trump could raise this issue again by the reason that they will reduce the military cost on the Korean Peninsula if our government will be sharing more cost, by fully developing more, cooperative frameworks, It means that we have to invest more, increasing our national budget tremendously. And even, I don't think that we are capable of increasing that much budget as of now, thinking about economic situations on the Korean Peninsula. So still, I want to ask our government, our foreign ministry and Ministry of Defense that, again, to persuade Washington, as Lee Myung-bak and Park Geun-hye administration has been going on, that until the unpredictability regarding the North Korean nuclear question is fully resolved, the operational control issues during the wartime must be, I think, going on like we agreed in the past administration.
Then, Dr. Woo, from a long-term perspective, how do you see the actual possibility of the Korean government to possess nuclear weapons?
If the discussion is derived from the Trump's mention of Korea and Japan's armament with the nuclear weapons, I think the possibility is very low. But I don't want to rule out any possibility of discussion of the nuclear armament, because we have to show to the North Korea that we are ready to lay out all the possibilities and all the alternatives, that if we can choose to denuclearize North Korea and deter the North Korea and defeat North Korea if they ever initiate a war against South Korea. But as you have observed the THAAD deployment case in North Korea, what would happen if some site was designated for the possible reintroduction of the U.S. nuclear tactics, or we are going to install the nuclear weapons in some sites? Then, as you saw in the THAAD case, then you cannot resist the public dissatisfaction for those kind of things. So even politically, I think it's very difficult for Korean government to arm itself with the nuclear weapons.
I think that the experts and the other people began to talk about the possibility of the South Korea's nuclear armament, mainly in terms of the Trump's talk during the campaign period. And he mentioned that to reduce the U.S. military burdens overseas. So if the South Korea and Japan do not pay more for the U.S. military support in the region, then the U.S. may allow the two countries to have the military weapons, just for self-defense. That's, I think, why we are now talking about the possibility of nuclear armament in this region. But I don't think that the Trump took serious considerations about what kind of consequences the nuclear armaments of the two countries would bring about. Just did the campaign talk. So, and think about the gap between the campaign talks and what the Trump said in the winning acceptance speech just a few days ago. And unlike what he did in the campaign trail, in terms of the acceptance speech, he was like the just normal president, at least the president-elect. So I don't think that the Trump administration would allow South Korea and Japan to develop their own nuclear weapons, because still it does not go with the U.S. security interest in this region.
Unrealistic. But to the Korean position, if the U.S. extended deterrent system is not guaranteed, then something like that. If North Korea continues to have nuclear weapons, for example, in the year 2020, they're going to have almost 100 nuclear weapons. It means that balance of terror will be completely, destroyed on this soil. Then Washington must provide a nuclear umbrella, with more realistic options. Probably, sometimes talking about NATO system, nuclear sharing agreement, something like nuclear weapons sharing agreement, something like. Otherwise, our government will be cornered and our security will be damaged to such a serious level. This is an issue I think we have to talk about.
Right. We have only a few minutes left. Please let me hear from each of you final remarks about these questions. Under all these circumstances, what kind of strategy is needed for the Korean government to better deal with it?
It is true that we are not prepared for the election of the President Trump. I think even U.S. government was not prepared for the election of the President Trump. So we are shocked, but we don't have to panic. We still have a time to give our inputs to Trump transition team, and it takes much longer time for Trump government to nominate his cabinet members and fill all the important positions. So we have enough time to discuss all the possibility and all the issues on Korean Peninsula with the Trump government in the 3 or 5 months. So even though we are shocked, but we don't have to panic.
All right. Professor Min?
Yes. As Dr. Woo mentioned, in terms of Mr. Trump's win in the presidential election, it is true that security concerns are growing over Korean Peninsula, and it's not clear what direction Trump administration will show in terms of dealing with the North Korea and the Peninsula issues. So, but as Dr. Woo mentioned, I also expect that the Trump administration will go through at least the 6 months or a little bit longer than the 6 months in terms of the policy review process. It's like the empty paper for the Trump administration. So we got some time, like a golden time, to be prepared for dealing with the upcoming Trump administration. So we needed to make connections with the key figures of the upcoming Trump administration, and try to explain the South Korea's situations and policy toward North Korea and the Peninsula with the fact sheet or the accurate data, and get mutual understanding between the two countries. So we need to make a basis for the close relations with the upcoming new Trump administration.
Okay. Professor Park?
Apart from the economic areas where a lot of trade protectionism could be expected, I think security areas will be rather less affected by a new administration there. And what I am trying to say to our government is that we have some connections to Trump camp, probably next Trump administration, like Edwin Fuller, the former president of Heritage Foundation, who visited South Korea. I met him several times when he visited Seoul. Probably he had visited more than 100 times, as far as I understand, and tried to give clear message that Trump could be our good partner also in the future. Also, Richard Haas, chairman of the Council on Foreign Relations, who to have such a good knowledge on Korean question. So from now on, our government must expand dialogue channels to those American experts who have a deep understanding on the Korean question. Then I think there is not many problems as we think it will be, because American security framework on Asia, particularly in Northeast Asia, will not be that much different from past ones, because there is their national interest. This is what I'm saying.
Thank you so much for taking your time and sharing your opinions today.